if I could start on page 99, Minister, regarding education, and the Auditor General raises concerns about capital works programs, specifically in relation to the transition of Year 7 into high school. I think the words he uses here are any time delays in these works may impact this transition. Are all capital work projects that will accommodate the Year 7s moving into a high school setting next year, will they all be ready for day one of term 1 next year?
My understanding is yes, obviously the officers I have here, and I should introduce as thank you for welcoming Mr Bernardi, who's the CFO for the Department for Education, also Anthony Creek, who is the Director of Financial Accountability and Compliance. And I, again, as we did during estimates, send the best wishes of the Shadow Minister, I'm sure, and myself to Julianne Riedster, who I have no doubt is watching online as she was last time. But my understanding is yes. Sorry. My understanding is yes. I believe I've interpreted the member's question correctly. It was that the projects that needed to be ready for the Year 7s to fit into the accommodation need to be ready. Primary schools, projects where there is work that is unrelated to increasing capacity. For example, there's an ongoing stream of projects, but the ones that we need to build capacity for the Year 7s and the aspects of those projects certainly to fit the Year 7s in are still at this stage on track, and I certainly anticipate that to continue. Certainly hope it will continue, and we're working very hard to ensure that that's the case.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. So on the same page there, page 99, and in reference to your answer, my understanding from previous comments that the Chief Executive has made, I think, is that if some of those projects which have been delayed don't have the, let's call them bricks and mortar builds to accommodate Year 7 students moving onto high school campus completed in time for the first day of term next year, that in some cases portable or demountable buildings will be used. Is there still a plan to have those deployed, and if so, is there any indication of how many might be used?
I'll be really clear. The plan is to have the accommodation ready, bricks and mortar or whatever else, and as we get closer to the end of this year, we can say that with greater confidence. Indeed, the risks are reducing with every project that gets completed, and with every project still to be completed that has less and less work still to do. So in relation to contingency plans that may be in place for worst possible case scenarios, look, of course, and the Chief Executive has made comments about that in the past, and you would want there to be contingency plans in place, but I reiterate, of course, that our absolute first focus is on getting these projects completed, and as I say, the risk is reducing every day that goes past with these body of works that continue to be done.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister, for your answer. If I could take you to page 92 and still on education, there's a bar graph at the bottom of that under employees which shows the number of administrations, school service or SSOs and teachers. Admittedly, I'm working off a pretty poor photocopy, I think, here, but my reading of that is that the number of teachers between 2018 and the most recent data there of 2021 shows fewer teachers. Can you tell us why, if I am correct in my characterisation of that, why that's the case?
So I think I know the graph the member is talking about. I think there may be an issue with the point of time where it is gathered, and I think my assessment of that graph was a slight increase from 2018 to 2021, but notwithstanding, the number that the department uses in estimating its workforce planning and reporting to Treasury and DPC and so forth, far more regularly is the Term 1 census, which, as the member would potentially recall, is taken at the last payday before the Term 1, the last payday in March before the school holidays, every Term 1, and that shows 2018 at that Term 1 census there being 12,678 FTE, and 2021 13,748 FTE. So In relation to any variation between the Term 1 census date figure and the graph in the Auditor General's report, which I'm assuming is a 30th of June figure, I'll take on notice why that difference is apparent, because although my reading of the chart is slightly different to the Shadow Minister's, it certainly doesn't seem to reflect, in my view, that increase of over 1,000 FTE that our Term 1 census data shows.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. Thank you for your answer there. And yes, you're right. You are correct. I see there in terms of the difference between the 2018 figure and the 2021 figure. If I could take you back to the capital works to accommodate Year 7s transitioning into a high school setting, and just to question a bit more your previous answer, have some schools been, those schools who are getting works done to accommodate Year 7 students who are moving onto their campus, have some schools been told to expect works that will be ongoing in Term 1 of next year? And are there many?
Look, there's a couple in a situation. Now, the sort of works, I think we've spoken about some before. So the example, I think it's Playford International College, I think, is one. And I stand to be corrected if I'm making a mistake here. It's not specifically to the Auditor General's reports, but I think the question is a reasonable one. And if I recall correctly, the situation at Playford is one where there is some capacity increases. There's a range of works that will be completed by the end of this year, and there's one specific segment of the project, if you like. I think it's possibly the tech studies area, or it might be a science area, but anyway, there's one specific building where it's not actually part of the project to expand the numbers that is required, but it is an upgrade to an existing facility. So in Term 1, the existing facility is capable of being used, and I believe that the plan is that in Term 2, that new facility will be ready and the existing one can then be decommissioned altogether. But that one isn't in... That's an example of the sort of work that I'm talking about. So the expansion is certainly on track, as I understand, but a specific portion of it, an upgrade to a facility, if you like, might potentially be, well, certainly at that school, there's an expectation it'll be a little bit later. I think there's a couple of schools where it's been identified that potentially some of the landscaping might be into Term 1 a little bit. This is not an unusual feature in school builds, that some of these processes take a bit longer. I think there's a school where there's a question mark over whether the car parking is due to be finished the week before week 0 or week 1. So obviously it would be better if it was the week before week 0, but if it was week 1, then it's the sort of thing that people manage. Car parks get fixed from time to time, and this is a car park at the end of a building project. But to the member's core question of the works that will be going on to ensure that the facilities are ready for the Year 7, my advice, the last advice that I recall receiving certainly was that that was the case, that they will be ready. But indeed, there are works that will continue. Now, some projects, like I believe, particularly at primary schools, there are a number of those where the upgrades are started later and indeed will be complete during next year, as is the time frame that's been well understood for a while. So, and certainly there's further projects that we announced this year. We announced a series of projects in this year's budget. They'll be rolled out next year, I think some of them into the first half of the following year. This part of the ongoing capital works program.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, if I could take you to page 101, which is administered items, and there are some lines here which talks about transfers and grants to private schools. And if I could ask about the loans which are administered under the SA Government Financing Authority, or SAFA. Can you tell us how many loan applications were received in the 2020-21 financial year, and how many of those were approved? If Mr Bernardi, you have that data?
It's a Treasury program, but that said, rather than asking the member to get the Shadow Treasurer to ask the Treasurer, maybe it's easier if I just take that on notice. So SAFA is obviously part of the Treasury Department. The administration is a role where there's a report that comes through education, and I send a memo to the Treasurer, as I understand it, reporting on that progress. Look, irrespective of which minister is relevant, I'll take that on notice and we'll bring back an answer to the member.
Member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate you taking that on notice. Thank you, Minister. Just a supplementary of sorts, I guess. Are you the Minister who approves those, or does the Treasurer approve the loans under SAFA?
Look, maybe we can incorporate that answer into the previous question in terms of getting the technicality right. Certainly I make a recommendation to the Treasurer based on the information that the panel, which is an independent panel, or independent, it's public servants from Education and Treasury, and there may be somebody else on it. They make a recommendation to me and I pass the memo on to the Treasurer, who formally is the signatory. Certainly he is, and we can clarify the status of my memo, if you like, on the way.
Very good. Member for Wright.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. That sounds like a plan. I have heard, admittedly anecdotally, that the wait times to have the loans approved have blown out. Is there anything you can tell us about whether or not it is true that over the last few years the amount of time between a non-government school applying for a loan under the SAFA budget line has blown out, so to speak, and schools are waiting longer to hear if they have been approved?
I can't speak for what the original year or two of the loans were. The genesis of the project, I think, was the last couple of years of the former government, and there was a low-interest loans facility announced by Treasurer Koutson-Tonis, as he was then, and that was taken up by a number of schools. And then when we came in, we continued that program, and then in last year's budget we adjusted it significantly. We turned it from a low-interest loans program to a no-interest loans program for the first 5 years of a loan, and then we were able to also put some further money into that program to provide more opportunities for schools. So I think that there has certainly been that change in last year's budget, and that generated a significant level of interest, as I understand it, from the non-government school sector, people who are interested in accessing one of those loans. But of course we do have a process which the member will get a bit more detail about in the answer that I've taken on notice in the previous question, to ensure that taxpayers' money is wisely spent, and that the applications meet the requirements of the program. In relation to whether there's any differences from the way that it was administered previously, I don't have any anecdata to compare to the member's anecdata, but I imagine that there's possibly some impact that the change from a low-interest loan program to the no-interest loan program would have meant that there was certainly a gap between the last ones under the last program and the ones under the new program. Maybe people who were thinking about putting in a low-interest loan application thought, well, we might wait a month or two until the no-interest loan is a more attractive proposition. That may well be part of it, but beyond that I can't answer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. And on the same topic there, and I accept this is probably something you'll have to take on notice as well, but nonetheless, I wonder if you can tell me what the average turnaround time from application to approval is, the shortest turnaround time and the longest turnaround time from application to approval under that loans line.
I'll take the question on notice, but in terms of that, I can't commit to the categories the member has identified necessarily matching up neatly with anywhere where there's data. I mean, I'll give the member an example of why I say that's the case. You may have an application for a loan that doesn't meet the criteria, or meets part of the criteria, where the panel may have asked for further information, or the school may have then redone their application to ask for something slightly different, acknowledging that their criteria wasn't met. I mean, not all of these applications, as I understand it, are necessarily approved, or they might not necessarily be approved for the sum of money that was requested in the first place. So what I'll do is I'll take the question on notice. I'll endeavour to provide information that will meet the sense of the sorts of things the member was asking about, but I just can't commit to the exact detail the member's asking for, because the answers might not actually match up neatly to the questions being asked.
for right.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. I'm happy to phrase that in a different way. Perhaps if you could take on notice the data for all applications that were approved, regardless if they were approved for the initial asking amount or a different amount, the shortest, longest and average wait times, that would be fantastic.
Consider it done.
Member for right.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, page 89 talks about significant events and transactions, and it mentions here that Education returned $111 million to the Department for Treasury and Finance. I wonder if you can tell us where, what budget lines that was returned from.
So I'm advised that the return of $111.4 million was pursuant to the Department of Treasury and Finance's cash alignment policy. In relation to the more technical detail related to the question, I'll take that on notice and bring an answer back.
Member for right.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. And the bottom of page 100 this time. It says here that schools receive funding for repairs, maintenance and minor works, but not all of that has been spent. I'm wondering if you can tell us how much of that money provided for repairs, maintenance and minor works wasn't spent and why that was the case.
I thank the member for the question. The substantial answer to this is that the way that it works is the money goes to schools who then hold it in their SASIF accounts, and we were seeking that schools spend that money during the calendar year and indeed get those projects underway, but we certainly provided a high level of flexibility to the schools to have the money spent for that purpose. They have the money and hang on a second. And so we'll come back to the House with further detail in relation to where we're up to on how much has now been spent, depending on the records that we have available. But there's obviously a reconciliation that takes place after the fact. So the work's done, tradie invoices the school, gets paid, and it has that delay in appearing in the budget statement.
Member for right.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Still on page 100, and the bottom dot point there under statement of cash flows talks about SASIF, or the SA Schools Investment Fund, that I note in this most recent Auditor General's report. It talks about just shy of $500 million being held collectively in the SASIF accounts, and that amount increased by $42 million. The increase of $42 million I don't suppose is very surprising given the events of COVID, but I'm wondering, has the Minister or his department done any work in terms of plans to try to access any of that money, or encouraging schools to use some of the $499 million they have sitting collectively in their SASIF accounts?
I thank the member for the question. So there's, I think, three significant new funding programs that have seen additional money go to schools in the period more than was previously. One of them we just touched on in relation to those maintenance grants for schools, $20,000 to $100,000 for every school and preschool in the public education system, all 900 of them. And indeed, the preschools had that, having had that earlier round as well. So that large amount of money, and I think it totals in the order of $37 million, is in varying stages of having been spent on works completed, spent on works underway, to be spent on works underway, and there's possibly a smaller number of schools that are seeking to consolidate it with further money they're looking to spend on getting their projects. Indeed, a number of schools having had the grant, or preschools having had the grants of $20,000, $30,000, $70,000, $100,000, however many, a number of them I am aware of have chosen to supplement that with their own projects. So they might have had $50,000 combined with $50,000 new. You can get a significant project underway. So certainly that's a part of it. The second group is there was a $7 million paid to schools in May to June 2021 to assist with purchasing furniture, fittings, fixtures for the Year 7 transition. Now, obviously, those grants are being spent for a particular purpose, and I would anticipate that schools are going to be spending that by the beginning of next year, if they haven't already. And then further, there was the agreement in the EB for complexity funding, and that money is going directly to schools. Now, I anticipate that a large amount of that has been spent for its purpose, but it's because of the timing of when we're paying it, then there's that as well. Schools raise money, schools put money into their SASIF accounts for purpose. They have their own ideas about things they'd like to spend money on, and indeed we certainly encourage them to do so, and we work with those schools that wish to do so. We'll continue to monitor SASIF balances, but also, while doing so and encouraging schools, facilitating schools to do so, we do like schools to have a certain amount of flexibility that they can identify projects they wish to pursue and indeed fund them, or indeed individual capital projects, but they could be also ongoing projects that the school has plans for those monies as well.
Right.
Chair, and thank you for your answer, Minister. If I could take you back to page 101, it also mentions the operating grant provided to the SACE board, which is, I think, 22 million there for an operating grant. No doubt the Minister is aware of what's been in the press around what has been characterised as a staff turnover. I'm wondering if the Minister can tell us any work he or his department have done around finding out why that staff turnover is occurring and what's being done to rectify it.
Well, the SACE board is obviously a statutory authority with a reasonable level of independence from the day-to-day management of the Minister. It's got a board. The chair of that board is Jane Danvers. She was appointed under the former government and she's been reappointed under this government. The chief executive of SACE is Martin Westwell, Professor Martin Westwell. He was appointed under the former government and he's continued to serve under this government, but the point I'm making is that it's a level of independence there. I was interested to see Professor Westwell asked about this very question on the television news on Sunday night, and I noted his response that he thought that it was a pretty low thing. I don't want to quote him exactly because I don't recall his exact words, but he certainly described the fear-mongering of the beat-up in relation to this matter. He described this sort of fear-mongering as very disrespectful to our Year 12 students who are about to undertake their exam preparations, and reassured the community, as he has reassured me, that indeed the relevant work that needs to be done to ensure that our exams are accurately marked and assessed on time and results provided on time is indeed absolutely on track to be the case. I've spoken to the chair of the SACE board, Jane Danvers, about this as well, and she has reassured me that it is not just her opinion, but the relevant members of the SACE board who have the expertise and who have looked at the matter with the chief executive following the fear-mongering being raised in the media, and they are very, very confident that the response provided by the chief executive in relation to this matter was accurate. And I think that as our Year 12 students do undertake their exams, it is worthwhile. I thank the member for the opportunity to reassure them that their exams will be assessed well by SACE and accurately and on time. That's the assurance I've had from the SACE board. That's the assurance I've had from experts in the SACE board. I understand that there is a disagreement with some relevant union representatives, and the union and the SACE board are having that disagreement. There's been a push to put that into the media, and that's very disappointing. I'd encourage all members not to fan that fire, to let the union disagreement with the SACE board be dealt with by the union and the SACE board's management as is appropriate, and indeed to give our students and their families and their teachers the respect that the end of their Year 12 deserves.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Happy to move to TAFE in the time we have remaining.
No, sorry, I'm not sure what I couldn't tell you what this is. I don't know about, I don't understand what this one was. This was your advisory. I don't know what else is in there.
Whenever you're ready. Member for it.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, and welcome, Mr Coltman. Page 527 here of the Auditor General's investigation into or report on TAFE shows the total FTEs at the point in time that this was done, I presume it would be. And I note that in the most recent budget as well, I think it had 140 FTEs to be cut from TAFE. I'm wondering whether you or Mr Coltman could provide us some advice about whether or not those cuts or what would be savings measures, I presume, have been realised.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be funny. Can you repeat the question? 140 FTE cut, I'm not quite familiar with the...
Thank you, Minister. Chair, that was the figure in the budget, I believe, and here it has a total FTEs under TAFE SA of 1,945, and I'm wondering whether or not the forecast FTE reduction of 140 foreshadowed in the budget is represented in this figure of 1,945.
Look, I'm not sure that's a fair reflection. It doesn't marry up with... But look, rather than argue the point, might I take that question on notice and allow the member for right to have some more questions?
Member for it.
Chair and Minister, I'm wondering, given the Auditor General's report here into TAFE deals in quite explicit detail with income that is received by the organisation for the courses that it runs, I'm wondering whether the Minister can tell us whether or not there is any further reductions which we saw represented in the previous Auditor General's report that we can expect to see represented in this one or forthcoming in the next financial year.
I'll kill two birds with one stone. No planned reductions, and I've got some advice in relation to the last one. The 140 figure apparently is not a cut, it's how much TAFE was under their cap, which is something quite different as I understand it.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your answer, Minister. So am I right in saying across the last financial year and the reporting period for the Auditor General there has been no reduction in FTEs from TAFE?
I'll take that on notice and so that you can have another question.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that, Minister. And my question is really the same as the former one, but in relation to courses. If the Minister could advise us about whether there has been a reduction in the total number of different courses offered by TAFE in the last financial year.
I'm advised that there is not a reduction in the total number.
And then the four suggested amendments is another question.
Chair. Minister,
Member for
final question. Has any further work or investigations been done by you or your agency into planned closures of any further TAFE campuses in South Australia?
Not that I'm aware of, not that Mr Coltman's aware of.
The examination in regards to the Auditor General report with regard to the Minister for Education has concluded, given that time has expired.